Hey guys, so what I wanted to do in this video was I wanted to check out all the stuff that MLB.com has been doing. Now, the first thing I wanted to look at was the Dream Bracket, the first round that they had, where they chose the best players from all the teams and kind of put them in one team and see which team was the best. And it wasn't perfect. Don't get me wrong; it had some obvious choices, but I wanted to take a look back at it and see where I thought that there could have been some improvements and where it should have actually gone. To start it off, it was the New York Yankees versus the Mariners. Now, this one was actually one of my favorite noticing first rounds just because the Mariners had a great team, although they've never won a World Series. And with having the Yankees face them already so many times in the 43 years that they've been around, it would be an interesting matchup. Now, I obviously thought that the Yankees would win, and they did, but it was a very close one to see. And the same with the next one with the Cleveland Indians and the Negro League All-Stars. The Cleveland Indians did win that one, and that one made sense as well. Now, the next one, the Houston Astros versus the Baltimore Orioles, that one could have went either way. Baltimore definitely has had many more years to add on many players, has given them time to accumulate better players overall. But yet somehow Houston won. That's fine. It worked out for the best, I guess. Detroit and Los Angeles Angels, they had this one seemed, it was probably one of the more obvious ones overall in the first round, as the Angels, they haven't had an amassed amount of stars yet. Detroit has had many, many years with many stars. It worked well for them, and I think that they should have went farther than they did, but they did make it past the Angels. Now, the first upset that people were talking about was the Twins faced off against the Blue Jays. I was happy that the Blue Jays won, but the Twins were, to fans as well as to analysts, they thought that the Twins should have won because they had many more years to stack on better players. But hey, look, the Blue Jays had some incredible players, and if you look at their roster, it was an incredible roster. The next one was the Boston Red Sox and the Texas Rangers. They had another great round, although Boston seemed pretty obvious, and it works out that way. There was the White Sox and the Royals. That one I was a bit surprised by because the Royals have had some incredible players, but the White Sox have had more history, I believe. So it works that, and it makes sense that the Sox got past them, but if the Royals had done it, I would have been okay with that too. Now, this year's wild card was actually facing off against each other with the Oakland A's and the Tampa Bay Rays. That one I was very interested to see because the Tampa Bay Rays of this year specifically would probably have a majority of some of their best players, but the A's have had a lot longer of a history and have a lot more depth to work with. So they did win, but it was an interesting set of games to see. On the National League side, there was the Cardinals versus the Rockies. That one seemed a bit more obvious as the Cardinals they've won the second most World Series, and it makes sense why. Only behind the Yankees, they dominated. One of my favorite teams to look at that I was very interested to see how far they could actually get, which turns out not very far, was the under 25 team. Now, it's okay that they didn't make it past the Phillies because the Phillies, like the teams that did make it past the first round, have a lot of history, but it shows how far they could have made it, that against one of the better teams history-wise in the National League, they actually fared pretty well. The Pittsburgh Pirates and the Arizona Diamondbacks faced off against each other, and unfortunately, had the Diamondbacks had just a couple extra years, this might have helped them a little bit more. But the Pirates have been around for a very, very long time, whereas the Diamondbacks have been around for only a little over 20 years, I believe. When they got Randy Johnson and they won, I believe they won the 2001 World Series, that was their main roster. Most of the players from that year and the year before, year after, was what was on it. So they didn't have a whole lot of time to add on to that. The next section was the Cincinnati Reds and the Washington Nationals. Same kind of deal, only even less time. I believe the Nationals team actually also had the Montreal Expos teams. I can't guarantee that, but I believe it did. but the Cincinnati Reds, they have some of the best players in the National League of all time that have even played there for a short amount of time. So it made much more sense that the Reds passed them. Now, the biggest upset, I believe, from the first round, other than one that is coming soon, was the Marlins getting past the Braves. I think this was the first one that they genuinely got wrong. And this was all a luck of the draw, because the Marlins do not have, but sure, they have some okay players that have been good over the years, but they have not been as nearly as good of a team as the Braves have been, and the amount of amazing players that the Braves have. And it also would have made a much better matchup for the next round. The round after the Marlins and the Braves was the Dodgers versus the San Diego Padres, and that one was obvious. The Dodgers, you kind of had to know that they were going to make it to one of the final couple teams in the National League, because they're one of the most dominant teams. The next one, which was probably the tightest of the National League, was the Chicago Cubs and the New York Mets. This one could have went either way. I do like the Cubs slightly better, and they did win, so I do think that they should have. They would have squeaked it away for me, as well as what they got from it. But the last one, the San Francisco Giants versus the Milwaukee Brewers, I don't believe the Brewers should have passed the Giants. The Giants had 3 World Series wins in the past 10 years. If you have that many wins, even just in modern times, that's got to mean something good, right? And sure, the Brewers do have some incredible players, but they made it far too ahead into the bracket for what they had. The next round in the bracket was the going back into the American League, was the New York Yankees and the Cleveland Indians. Now, this one could have went either way, but the New York Yankees are the better team. They did win, and in my mind, rightfully so. They're one of the top 2 teams overall, so it works. Cleveland is a good team, just not quite good enough. Houston versus Detroit. Detroit should have won, but Houston came away with that one. Detroit has more history, has more depth, I believe, overall, but Houston managed to get past that one. The upset from the Twins with the Blue Jays and versus Boston, one of the few rivals in the same division that I thought was kind of interesting, but the Boston Red Sox, they won pretty handily, and rightfully so. They're an incredible team, like the Yankees. The AL East has always been a very, very strong division, and it's okay that my team didn't win that one. The White Sox versus the A's. The White Sox won that one, and I think that one was probably the most could have gone either way out of this round of teams. They were a strong set of teams either way. The A's, I could understand how their pitching may not be quite as good as the White Sox pitching was, so it kind of worked out in that sense. Going back to the National League, the Cardinals faced the Phillies, and 2 very strong teams, but my other team, the Cardinals, they definitely came up on top, and rightfully so. One of the flaws for Philly is facing a team such as the Cardinals that are just so well-rounded. The Phillies are just not quite as much so as the Cardinals. The Pirates faced the Reds, and the Reds easily won that one, and that made plenty of sense. Not really much to talk about on that one. Now, with the Marlins facing the Dodgers, they couldn't have made it past that, and I'm very glad that they didn't. They shouldn't have even made it as far as they did. The Dodgers passed them easily, and in the final one of the National League for this round, the round of 16, the Milwaukee Brewers beat the Cubs, which, like I said before, they shouldn't have won the last round. They shouldn't have even won this round, but yet they won both. So then they got up to the quarterfinals. So back to the American League for the quarterfinals, there was the Yankees versus Houston. Yankees won. Obviously, that made so much sense. They were incredible so far, and Houston, I felt, was scratching along, even upsetting kind of both of the teams that they faced. So it didn't really make sense that they could do it for a third time. Boston and the White Sox, they were two good teams to go against each other, being the Red and White Sox. However, Boston, they won against each of their teams a little more easily, I find, and in my opinion, should have won a little more easily than what the White Sox did with their teams. So with Boston heading ahead into the semifinals versus the Yankees, that was 100% the right way that should have went on for the American League. Now, this one could have went either way. I would have loved to see the Cardinals pass the Reds, but I know that the Reds and Cardinals were both kind of, with the NL Central being pretty good, it made sense that they were could have gone either way. Unfortunately, the Reds won. I would have much preferred the Cardinals, but I can see how the Reds won, so I'm okay with that. But the final one, the Dodgers and the Brewers finally lost. I'm very, very happy for that. Like I said, they shouldn't have made it as far as they did. The Dodgers are far and away the better team, so although it went to Game 7, which didn't make sense either, the Dodgers are up and away the better team out of those two. So in the final 4 teams, it was the Yankees and the Red Sox versus the Reds and the Dodgers. Now, the Yankees and the Red Sox, that one could have went either way. I would have accepted either way, and the same thing for the National League with the Reds and the Dodgers. But it came down in the end that the Yankees won against the Red Sox, and I believe it was the Dodgers beat the Reds. I'm glad about the Dodgers thing. I kind of would have rather had the Red Sox win against the Yankees if it were up to me, but it's fine either way. So it ended up being the Dodgers and the Yankees, and the Yankees narrowly squeezed it out against the Dodgers, which, if you didn't expect the Yankees to win, then that's kind of on you, because they're the best team. They've won the most World Series. They've been around the longest. They're literally everything that you'd ever want a baseball team to be. Although they haven't won a World Series in the past, decade, since 2009, they still have the most wins in the past decade. Like, they're a number 1 winning team. If you're on that team, you will win. So I do expect that in the next bracket that they have, where they do individual years for teams, and the dream bracket of 64, that one of the Yankees years will probably get within the top 4, if not even win the whole thing. But we'll have to stay tuned to see what ends up happening. If you guys enjoyed this, leave a like and subscribe so that you can see upcoming videos. I plan on posting more now, and definitely upgrading my editing and my video quality as things progress. So stay tuned for that, and keep updated for more content.